Well, here to give us his views is Jens Larsen, RBC Capital Markets Chief European Economist. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I know we've been saying this for over a year, almost 2 years actually now, Jens, that we need stronger leadership. It needs to be the political governments to actually push us forward, but they haven't so far. What makes us think that now they're coming together and actually driving this forward to avoid a crisis, to avoid the next phase of the crisis?
Well, I think there is nothing like a good crisis to focus minds, and I think that is effectively what we have seen over the last few weeks. Post the annual meetings, you have seen that renewed momentum in the political decision making, but also clearly a renewed momentum in the policy making on the central bank front. And I do think it's important. Sure, you know, as your previous speaker said, you can't kick the can down the road infinite, and you do need structural policies. You do need that fiscal rebalancing and all that. But it's very important to have a joined up near-term policy response that prevents very bad outcomes.
Yeah, but Jens, we're in a strange situation because it's the policymakers that have been taking the lead and actually injecting liquidity on the system, but it's not really their role. It has to be the politicians at the end of the day deciding what to do with the banks. Are you confident that finally Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy have been made aware of the severity of the situation and that we will get a resolution on the banks before that G20 in Cannes in November?
Well, I hope we'll get a resolution in the bank, and as I said, I think a plan is clearly in the making. You could argue, and I think that's a perfectly defensible point, that there's been many opportunities over the last couple of years to recapitalize European banks in a more profound way. The response to the 2008 incidences, the 2008 crisis on the European front, were arguably not strong enough. So I think seeing what we're seeing now, the question shouldn't be whether they will do something. I feel confident there will be some further recapitalization. The question is, are they going to go far enough, and are they going to get to the root of the bank problem? But alongside that, you know, it's not just the bank problem. They need to address the sovereign problem, and they need to have the funding to do that. That's why these three steps, the banks, the EFSF, and Greece are tremendously important.
But what are you most concerned about? Is it the banks? Is it about the French banks? And why have the French left it so long before announcing that they do have a plan in place to recapitalize them?
I'm concerned about all three of them, and I think you can't look at them. You can't look at them in isolation. You do have to look at the three things at the same time, and that's why I said you need a coordinated response. This is why it's so very difficult to do, because you need to get policymakers that are focused on their own country, on their own banks, on their own fiscal situation to work together. The governor of the bank yesterday said that every country requires a different response, and that's different now compared to 2 years ago. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think actually right now a common response is required.
And when do you think we'll have a better idea of whether we are plunging into recession, or that we can't handle this crisis, or whether this is being dealt correctly? Will it be that all-important G20 November in Cannes, or will we also have a better indication? For example, if the Troika come up on the 24th of October, this is the date that was set by Mr. Juncker, and say, actually, you haven't done enough, you're not going to get that extra payment. Would this bring us back to almost square one?
Well, I think it'll bring us back behind square one if they don't get Greece doesn't get the next payment, and I think it will be almost in the same position if that G20 meeting doesn't produce a sense of momentum. What I'm worried about is not just that there'll be momentum, but whether there's actually something that looks like a specific plan at that point.
So Jens, I know it's always difficult, and I always try to push on this, but give me a percentage. Do you think that actually there's a 60% chance that we will get through this and we will, be by the end of the year out of the woods, or is it more of a 30% chance?
Well, I wouldn't put it like that, because it depends on the policymakers' response. It is perfectly within the capacity of European global policymakers to do something about that. And if they get their acts together, I would put it very close to one that we'll get through this. We still may get a recession. We'll certainly get a slowdown in growth. But a financial or fiscal or sovereign Armageddon is perfectly preventable, and I think they'll do it.
And so policymakers, are you saying that Mario Draghi needs to act as soon as he takes the reins, so we'll get a cut in interest rates as soon as November?
I think a cut in interest rates is not the most important thing for Mario Draghi. I think a cut in interest rate would be a good thing. In fact, it would have been better if they hadn't raised rates in the first place. But I think Mario Draghi's first focus should be on the ECB's contribution to resolving the sovereign issues. That's got to be his focus first.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Jens Larsen, their Chief European Economist at RBC Capital Markets.